I live in Oakland County, Michigan. When I was a kid in the 70s, kids were abducted, sexually assaulted, and then strangled and left dead near where I grew up. No arrests. No closure. We talked about it nonstop growing up, but time has moved on and the killer is most likely dead or an old man. So whoever it was got away with it. Not really disturbing, but I'm shocked it's never been really picked up. This was in the mid to late 90s. A guy randomly stabbed a 80-ish-year-old multiple who was on a mobility scooter outside of a supermarket by a train bridge. He then grabbed the guy and tried to throw him over the bridge. The local news went mad with it at first, and the papers were making out it was a sign of the bad attitude of the youth, etc. However, it turned out this old man was actually an ex-loan shark who'd lent this guy's mom $5,000 in the 80s, and then when she couldn't pay back, raped her to cover the interest. This happened on a weekly basis. She called the police after a few months when a friend of hers had witnessed the rape and him admitting to it. Sadly, when it went to court, the witness refused to give evidence and he got away with it. He then apparently beat the S***T out of this woman, leaving her in hospital and partially disabled for the rest of her life. Fast forward 18+ years, the boy who had been a toddler at the time learnt about this and went after the loan shark. The man died after the stabbing and the boy went to prison. The media seemed to drop the story once it came out why he'd stabbed the guy. Everybody knew about this loan shark and knew he was a vile POS who had the police in his pocket. What I find disturbing is barely anybody knows the backstory, but even now I hear people saying about the case and saying how sick it was that somebody could just stab a stranger. Not my hometown, but just a bit down the road, where I lived for a few years. Wife files for divorce and a restraining order from her abusive husband, files for full custody of their 2 kids, all that fun stuff. A few weeks later, the husband shows up at the grocery store she works as a clerk at, armed with a .22 handgun, which he stole from his brother. He goes in intending to kidnap her at gunpoint. He goes in and grabs her by her hair and begins dragging her into the parking lot, but as he's forcing her out of the store, a customer at the customer service counter attempts to step in and is shot and killed. A second customer attempts to step in the parking lot and meets the same fate, at which point she gets loose and attempts to flee, and he turns the gun on her, killing her before sitting on a bench in front of the store and shooting himself. My aunt was childhood friends with her, and my grandma told me the story one day when I found some pics of them together while I was trying to track down embarrassing childhood photos of my dad in the photo albums. To date, I've never seen any mention of the story outside of my family and old newspaper articles. A man kidnapped and abused a child, who was terrified and in captivity long enough to keep quiet for years despite having access to internet and phone. At one point, he even left a message for his parents on a message board, asking if they'd keep looking for him. His parents thought this was a troll, as he used his own name. Years later, the man kidnapped another child. This child happened to have been walking with another boy around his age before he was taken. The other boy happened to know a lot about / have a special interest in trucks, and was able to relay to the police that he saw a color / make / model / rust pattern. The police caught the man days later with that information, and both boys were safely released. If you grew up in the community when he was growing up, you knew him. You worked with his mom, he managed you at the local pizza chain back in the day, he went to your high school, he asked your friend out long ago. My partner and I were walking our dogs last night and saw a little girl playing outside her home unaccompanied by her parents. She was sweet and we were sweet back. But it made me think about Michael, Sean, and Ben. How we talked about them growing up and now not so much. Almost 500,000 children are reported missing each year in the U.S. The event didn't happen in my town, but one of the people involved used to frequent it a lot. About 20 minutes from me, there's an old hospital that I thought was closed off due to it being closed / abandoned since the 80s. Apparently, in the early 2000s, some guy owned it and lived in it. This guy had a son who eventually got into drugs really bad and ended up owing some dealers a lot of money. Dealers know he lived in that hospital, so they decided they were going to go get their money from him. They showed up and only the dad was there, so they went after him. There's 2 versions depending on who you're able to get to talk about it. The first is they shot him in the head with a shotgun, blowing his brains all over one of the rooms. The second is that they beat him so badly that his brain went everywhere. Both are plausible because he was beaten really badly and there were shotgun blasts along the walls. There was also a trail of blood. This happened in a town even smaller than the one I live in, Pop of 50 versus Pop of 403. So everyone knows everyone's vehicle, and several people saw an unknown vehicle driving slowly through the town. The son wasn't well liked before this happened, and he for sure isn't well liked now. The dad was loved. The people were never caught, and the son's drug problem got worse. I'm not sure who owns the hospital now, but I do know that as of 2020 the blood stains were still there, and it's suspected the brain matter is still there too because no one went in to clean it up and it's never been torn down. I have to drive by it every time I go to my friend's house in that town. When I was in 11th grade, there was a quiet, kind of nerdy kid who sat behind me in my first period English class. He was sometimes annoying and other kids were assholes to him, but I always tried to be nice. One day I was talking to another friend in that class about a book I really wanted to buy. He obviously overheard our conversation. The next morning the book was sitting on my desk when I arrived at school. He'd gone out and bought it for me the night before and said it was because I was always kind to him. It was a little awkward but thoughtful. I remember this incident vividly because a few days later he ended up killing both of his parents with a shotgun while they slept. He then went on the run and was featured briefly on America's Most Wanted. I believe he was 17 at the time. He was caught a few weeks later somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, which is far away from where we lived in southern Ontario, Canada. Crazy. 3 teenagers were slashed to death in the concrete riverbed/channel behind a miniature golf/arcade parking lot. Nobody was ever arrested. If you've ever seen the original Karate Kid movie, that's where they filmed the date scene right around the same time it happened. My family lived next door to a dude who killed his wife, chopped her head off, left her head in the crawl space of his home, and threw her body off a bridge near the neighborhood of another family member of mine. The body didn't make it into the water below, so it was quickly spotted and the guy was thrown in jail. We had one similar, but it was with a football player who had the worst trip on some drugs, cut his mom's head off, and when the police arrived he was playing a game of football in the front yard with her head. I believe he went to a mental institution rather than jail, but it's one of those things that your parents told you happened when they were growing up, but no one talks about it. My senior year of high school there was a girl in my friend group. Her mom killed and dismembered her own mom, friend's grandma, and hid her body in the shed. This was about 10 years ago, but it took a little Google few to find an article about it because there wasn't much that I could find. A man on my street beat his wife to death and poured boiling oil over her body in an effort to cover it up. His 2 children saw this happen and escaped the house, alerting neighbors. The man got 15 years and didn't even serve that. His children were forced to live with his parents and he maintained contact while the wife's family never saw the kids again. He was also released temporarily on compassionate grounds on a day dedicated to domestic violence awareness in her name. An absolute travesty of a crime that spat in the name of victims everywhere. The poor woman's name was Caroline Crossan. Funeral home was selling body parts and gold from teeth/jewelry without permission, using funds for luxury items and vacations, and giving loved ones cement mix in place of cremains. They literally operated a business called Body Brokers, from the same address as the funeral home. We had a mentally handicapped high school kid kill both his parents because he got upset. It was pretty awful. He didn't understand that what he did meant they couldn't come back. That's horrible. My younger brother is disabled, and when my kids were little I was genuinely afraid that he might get upset at them and hurt them. Mom was offended by this, but I remembered him kicking us hard when we were all younger, and I was worried that he might still do something like that. He never hurt my kids, never had the chance. But one time he hurt Mom really bad. Took her months to heal. He's never done anything like that since, and she thinks he realized what he did. Still, after that she was the one making sure he was never unattended with little kids. We had a dentist here who used to put his semen in syringes and squirt it into patients' mouths, including children, telling them it was some kind of medicine. At his trial, part of his defense was that he was using an anti-balding medication and was concerned about his sperm count, so kept vials of semen around the office to test them. He was pretty mum about how and why he wound up putting it into patients' mouths, though. Dude only spent a few months in jail. I believe his house burned down and he vanished. Then someone located him practicing dentistry without a license in Central America. Good times.